Good morning, everyone. I will go ahead and call this committee meeting of Ways and Means to order. If I could please have the secretary call the roll.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. Assemblyman Frierson. Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdigy.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Assemblywoman Titus. Assemblywoman Tolles. Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
And Chair Carlton.
And I am here. Please mark Ms. Benitez Thompson excused. Assemblywoman Titus, please mark her present when she arrives. She is testifying in another hearing. And please mark Assemblywoman Tolles absent excused. She might be able to get in, but she wasn't sure. So thank you very much. With that, committee members, we have one bill before us today. We originally had a BDR to be introduced, but it had to go back for technical reasons. So we will not be introducing that BDR today. So this will be a very brief meeting. And this is our first discussion on an actual bill. So we'll do our absolute best not to get into policy because the policy has been worked on in the other committee. It didn't actually have a fiscal note attached, but there were concerns because the Wildlife Fire Fund is involved, and that is a large fund, and they do come to the general fund for dollars. So we wanted to make sure that we had a conversation about AB 86 as it moves through the process. So I believe we have Ms. Peters this morning that'll be walking us through the bill, and we'll have our conversation. We will not be processing the bill today because we typically don't do that until the very end. But having the hearing allows us to process it at a later time if it's appropriate. So with that, Ms. Peters, if you would go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. I'm sorry, I have a couple of co-presenters who didn't get the link to the Zoom. So I'm trying on them.
If we need a moment to get them linked in, we can take a brief moment because we do have some other members who are getting ready to pop in. So if you need to get them the Zoom link, please do that. That's fine.
Okay,
we understand.
All right.
The first time we've done a bill like this, so it's going to take a while to iron out the wrinkles. No biggie.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we want to make sure everyone can participate.
Okay, I have the link, sending it to co-presenters now.
Chair, we are unmuted and ready to begin when you are.
All right, thank you very much. Apologies to those who might be watching on the internet. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we have overcome them. So with that, and also if I could please have the committee secretary mark Assemblywoman Titus present. She has arrived. Good morning, Assemblywoman Titus. So with that, Ms. Peters, if you'd like to go ahead and proceed and introduce your presenters, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Carlton, and Committee on Ways and Means. I appreciate the opportunity today to present AB 86, a policy bill with a potential fiscal issue. I did want to bring the committee's attention, I apologize, Sarah Peters for the record, the committee's attention to an amendment, a consensual amendment that was submitted to Nellis. This is a policy amendment, but it was brought up as a concern related to just the breadth of which we may unintentionally place liability on people who we historically don't put liability on. So, Chair, I am happy to go over that amendment as well in committee here, or if this is inappropriate at another time.
Ms. Peters, let's talk about the fiscal side of it first. And so that we understand that, since that's really what we're here about. And we know things evolve as time happens. So we'll have if you'd like to just walk us through the amendment after the fiscal part, that would be great. I'm assuming this will be an amendment that you will be presenting on the floor in addition to the bill when the bill gets to the floor, because we typically don't do policy amendments, especially this early in the session on bills, since the policy committee still have time to address it. We will do them at the very end of session simply because we're trying to get stuff done, but I would assume this is going to be presented on the floor.
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Now, please, let's have a talk about the Wildlife Fire Fund, please.
Great. Thank you. So Sarah Peters, again, for the record, I have with me today to help present the financial impacts of AB 86. I have with me Mr. Terry Taylor, who is I have his bio up here, a 28-year veteran of the as a captain of the fire investigator with the I can't remember exactly which fire agency it was. And I also have Mr. Mike Brown, who was with the fire service for 25 years. And I think I'm going to pass on to them to discuss some of the financial impacts of AB 86. I guess I could introduce the bill first. I'm sorry, Terry, do you mind going over, sorry, Mr. Taylor, do you mind going over the bill first and then going into the discussion of the potential impact to the wildfire fund, please?
Thank you very much. That would be great.
You guys are still on mute. If we could get you.
You are unmuted now, I believe.
Sorry, Mr. Taylor, do you mind going over the bill first and then going into the discussion of the potential impact to the wildfire fund, please?
Okay. So for the record, my name is Terry Taylor, and this bill was suggested to create a cost recovery by local government, and to allow those monies to be repaid to the Wildfire Protection Program funding after a wildfire has occurred. And the various sections, I guess you could say the main challenge that I found in the last 22 years of my career has been the clauses in NRS 472540 and 474550, which requires threatening human life in order to initiate cost recovery. And oftentimes in wildfires, the human lives that are there are only firefighters and law enforcement officers. And we sort of don't count historically in the courts. It's our job to do that. So I wanted to get that eliminated, and I wanted to get a clear path for special districts, counties, and cities to be able to file civil litigation under the idea of negligence and willfulness in order to recover monies expended by the fund and by local government. So basically, under the bill, it empowers county commissioners to bring an action against a person, a firm, association, or even an agency that's responsible for willfully or negligently causing a wildfire, and to recover those expenses incurred. And it also allows for reasonable attorney's fees by a public or a private attorney that might be hired by a fire district or a municipality or a county. And then basically the idea is that a local government could initiate a recovery action, and upon winning, the costs by the attorneys would be covered, and then the state fund would be repaid, as well as local government expenses. Initially, in talking with Assemblywoman Peters, we've been also talking with some other representatives. We've discovered that there's some concern about, in the rural areas, about things like warming fires and branding. So I made sure that we put something in there as a proposed amendment. And there was also concerns about liability for people who are basically doing something that is approved through permit, and then something happens, an unforeseen event. So a perfect example of that is the other day we had a legal burning day in Douglas County, but because of temperature differential, dust devils were formed. And so a dust devil came through a permitted fire and actually moved it down the road. Firefighters responded, put it out very quickly. It wasn't a big deal, but it could have been because of the wind. And so on a situation like that, there would be no liability. And so that's kind of what we're trying to shoot for. My concern about the fund is that unless we recover monies and pay the fund back, we don't know from year to year what our fire history is going to be. And so I think it's important to move forward on AB 86 so that we can recover monies from appropriate persons who have been negligent, or corporations or whatever, and keep the burden on the taxpayers and to the fire districts and fire departments to a minimum. And Assemblywoman, I hope that that gives enough of a description to answer your question.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. I believe you're watching us on YouTube, so there's going to be about a 20 to 30-second delay. So committee members with any questions, keep that in mind. They're not actually in the link. They're on they're watching through YouTube. So it's going to be a moment. So with that, the actual is, have you been able to estimate any actual impact on the fire fund?
So what I have done is I have researched the past payouts. I picked one department, Eastport Fire Protection District, and I looked at the last 7 years of their participation in the fund. and their costs have consistently risen, and they will rise again this fiscal year due to the neighbors fire, which occurred last June. So I don't, the impact of the bill is not designed to drain the fund in any way. The costs of investigation and litigation are already occurring and aren't paid by the fund. Really, the purpose of this bill is to be able to, in appropriate circumstances, to be able to bring money back to the fund, which would keep the cost to, well, really to the state, because if the fund goes dry, the general fund has to pick up the difference, and to make the fund basically over time self-supporting. So I don't see a drain on the fund. I see over time an addition to the fund, if that makes any sense, Chair Carlton.
Thank you very much, but we always want to have a conversation about both sides of the equation. So that we have it on the record. We appreciate that. Dr. Titus, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing a question. I just need some clarification, and maybe Zimmerman Peters can answer this, or even perhaps legal. I'm just wondering about the ability for the monies in the suit. So they could be, can you be sued by the county commissioners, and then you could be sued by a city, and then maybe the fire district, and then if you are successful, does that money then go into the fund and is dispersed, or are you perhaps starting 5 different lawsuits and then dividing up the monies? I'm just concerned about the money pathway and how that all falls.
So typically what occurs is that where the fire started establishes the jurisdiction. And so if we have a fire in, let's say, the East Fork Fire Protection District in Douglas County, the lawsuit for all parties involved would be in the 9th Judicial District. And then the other parties become, the other persons who've expended money become third-party plaintiffs. And so you have one lead entity and you have others joined together. And of course, what we're really talking about now is only public entities. And we're talking only about, using district attorneys or city attorneys to do this sort of litigation. And as I've in my discussions with the Wildfire Committee, as well as others, I've done this both in a public sector setting and a private sector setting as an investigator, and participated in teams of people. And what we do is typically there's a lead plaintiff, everybody else comes in, and in most cases these lawsuits are settled. And then at that point, the fund, which has paid out expenses, gets a percentage. So as an example, if the fund paid 25% of the fire cost for East Fork's neighbors fire last year, and East Fork was in fact able to sue the responsible party. We know what started it, we just don't know who in that case. It's $6 million plus fire. That the recovery then, 25% of that recovery would go back into the fund.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Thank you for the clarity, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Dr. Titus. Committee members, are there any other particular questions at this time? I don't believe I'm hearing any other folks wishing to be recognized at the moment. So thank you, gentlemen, very much for clarifying this. We just wanted to understand what the possible impacts might be. I'd like to clarify something. When you say agency, that could possibly be a state agency, correct? So a county could actually sue a state agency?
So yes, it could be a state agency. It could also be a local agency. We have had circumstances in the past where agencies are using prescribed fire and prescribed fire escapes due to actions of weather, some anticipated, some unanticipated. I'm sure we're all familiar with a recent event in the last couple of years. So basically, though, in that particular case, the state agency did not use the wildfire protection plan money. It had to settle the case out of the general fund. And that a local government entity, I've got to admit to you, I don't know exactly how it would be handled if a local entity using prescribed fire. That's one of the reasons we have Chief Brown here, Crystal Bay Incline area, North Lake Tahoe Fire Protection District has done extensive prescribed fire over the last 30 years. And Chief Brown has been involved in those things, and he might be able to answer that better.
So in answer to the question, again, Mike Brown, retired fire chief, represent the State Fire Chiefs Association today, and thank you for having us here. The responsibility, if we were looking at a state agency that actually did show there was some type of negligence, yes, but I believe that we would be working together to ensure that we were doing everything to protect that state agency because we're partners. We do a lot of partnership programs. So if they're working within the jurisdiction of a local, say a fire district, there would actually be agreements that were put into place that if there was an escape fire, how that escape fire would actually be taken care of financially, and also in the means of how we would suppress that fire. So, there's a lot of discussions that take place prior to any type of, I gotta say, prescribed fire that would be utilized between the agencies, whether it be federal, state, or local jurisdiction. So we'd hope to alleviate those types of situations and not have to get to that point where we would have to be looking at bringing some type of lawsuit against one of our state agencies. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. It does. Ms. Gorlow, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Carlton. And I'll try not to get too much into the policy. It ends up my husband's a meteorologist and he does fire weather. So he goes out on some of these fires to help support the firefighters. And so I know he gets paid by the federal government. So I'm kind of curious, how does the federal government budget come in to assist state budgets and when does that happen? If you could explain that a little bit more.
So I'm Mike Brown again. That's a great question. So participating on those team assignments and getting paid through the federal government actually is done through the agreements that the agency that he works for has with our federal partners. And so they step in and pay on those assignments. And the way those work is that normally the area that has the most jurisdiction, whether it be BLM, Forest Service, or local, are responsible for payment of those fires. And then after that, following it, if they do any type of investigation work or find negligence, that agency will actually go after the party that could be held negligent. So the federal government works at, and it's very similar to local jurisdiction. The fire agencies all have annual operating plans with our federal partners that allow personnel to participate on these team assignments and in different capacities. Your husband being a weather person, we also have several folks that actually work as incident commanders, operations, you name it, throughout there. And those are paid for, again, through the federal government first, and then they break it down to the agencies that have the biggest land base that is providing those services.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
Thank you, Ms. Gorlow. Committee members, are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, Assemblyman Roberts.
Yes, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to get some clarification from Assemblywoman Titus's question, this bill authorizes cities, counties in the state to initiate civil action. Let's say, for instance, you kind of explained the percentage if they all did, but let's say, for instance, a county commission brings civil action, but the state does not, and they recoup funds or, for their expenses. Would they still have to replenish the fire fund if they drew from it?
It certainly is my intent that should happen. And there may need to be some specific language about that. But typically a lot of this stuff goes on, as Chief Brown said, through interlocal agreements where you establish those relationships, including the financial relationships as well as the response capabilities. I can tell you from the standpoint of the private sector, where I worked for 7 years in the insurance industry, that when we For instance, in the Collin Ranch fire 9 years ago, we recovered literally tens of millions of dollars, and it was apportioned out on a percentage basis because it wasn't 100% of all the loss to the homeowners and property owners. It was apportioned out based on the loss itself. So if you had a house that had $100,000 worth of damage, and next door you had a house that was totaled, that was $1 million worth of damage, you had the pool of money that NV Energy put in, and the various companies shared on a basis of percentage of loss. I think it's fair to say with a number of fires, and of course we're also talking about accidental fires. You know, when lightning strikes, who do you sue? So it's the type of thing. This sort of litigation is not constant, especially in the larger fires. Smaller fires. Part of this bill was to be able to have local government be flexible on smaller fires where you don't even get any wildfire protection money or an FMEG. And so that's part of the thing also, is to give local government more flexibility to do cost recovery locally. And so we're just sort of clarified that authority in the statutes.
Just a quick follow-up. So your agreements between the jurisdictions could cover the cost sharing already?
Mr. Taylor, you are still on mute.
Sorry, go back. We were muted. Oh. Okay, sorry, we were muted, so I'll answer again. Typically, our agreements are based on either acreage or on what I call effort. So a larger department such as Truckee Meadows or Reno may send more resources than a smaller department. So again, it's worked out that way. They would have more cost, but a small department, let's say where the fire started, could be the lead plaintiff in a subrogation action. And then Reno would come in and say, we've expended X amount of money. Truckee Meadows would say the same thing. And then there would be recovery. Again, typically it's not 100%. And then it would be a portion on the percentage of those costs back to those entities.
Thank you for the answer, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Are there any other questions from any other committee members?
Madam Chair, Assemblyman Levitt.
Yes, Assemblyman.
So is there not any action or law in place already for negligence in these type of situations, like in the form of a fine or some other legal action? And if there is, would this be above and beyond those fines, or those fines go away now that there's the opportunity for civil action? How would that work?
Okay. So for the record, Terry Taylor. So typically, so far in state law, the criminal aspect of this is usually a misdemeanor, which by statute, the fine is $1,000. And so that was hilariously, that was discussed in the first Collin Ranch fire 9 years ago. Do we cite the corporation? The most you can do is put them on probation for 1 year and fine them $1,000 for that fire. So the TAC, when I've talked with district attorneys in the state, their attitude has been that the criminal law, since isn't really appropriate for things like this, and that the civil remedy makes more sense to try and, for lack of a better word, make their community whole again after a fire. Does that answer your question, Assemblyman?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Oh, except for I mean, I know the $1,000 is not really a huge amount of money, but would those fines now not be assessed if a civil case was brought forth and and costs were remediated in that fashion, or would they still have to pay the $1,000?
So for the record, Terry Taylor, so you could do both. You could, in fact, go ahead and move forward on a misdemeanor criminal case if you could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, which you, in some of these cases, you clearly can. You can show negligence, which is the standard, and willfulness. And if you show those two things, you would be able to go in criminal court, which sometimes that can help you in civil court. If the defendant has already, the defendant who would be also a civil defendant has already been found guilty of a criminal offense, they have to overcome that guilt in a civil sense. So you could in fact have both things occur after a wildfire and an investigation is conducted and you identify a defendant who was willful and negligent in the initiation of activity that caused a fire.
And thank you, Mr. Levitt. I appreciate the question, but I think we're starting to delve more into the policy side of it than we are the fund side of it. I know a lot of times the two blend together, and I think this is a great example of how we're going to have to approach a lot of bills that come to us. There's going to be some questions so that we understand the bill, so that we can understand the fiscal impact, but we don't want to dig too deep into the policy because the policy committee has already done their job and we want to respect the work that they've done. So, but I do understand having questions to make sure we understand how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. So committee members, are there any other questions at this time? I don't believe we have any other questions at this time. So with that, thank you, gentlemen, very much for being here today to walk us through the possible fiscal impacts of this bill. We do appreciate it. Ms. Peters, did you have any closing comments to make? We won't be discussing the amendment. It's a policy amendment that you will be working with the, I assume the chair of the committee and the committee members and other members. So if anyone does have questions of Ms. Peters on the amendment, they should go directly to her. We won't be discussing an amendment at this time, since there's still time in the regular process to actually address any changes to the policy. So Ms. Peters, did you have anything else?
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Peters for the record. I just wanted to thank Mr. Taylor and Mr. Brown for being able to attend the meeting this morning to discuss these issues and for their advocacy on the recovery of these costs to the state and local governments. And thank you, committee, for hearing it.
Okay, if everybody would just hold on a moment. Having a little technical difficulty here, so give us just a moment and then we'll proceed from there. Okay, so with that, thank you guys very much. I apologize. I had a glitch. So with that, since this is a actual bill hearing, we'll go ahead and go through the support, opposition, and neutral. Please, anyone making comments, please do keep them to the 2 minutes. So broadcast services, do we have anyone in the queue in support of Assembly Bill 86.
Chair Carlton, this is Michael from Broadcast. The public comment and bill commentary line is open and working. However, we have 0 callers at this time.
Okay, so we'll still go through the technicalities of asking. So we have no one in support. It's my understanding that there is no one in the queue for opposition and no one in the queue for neutral. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. So with that, I believe we can go ahead and close the hearing on Assembly Bill 86. Thank everyone who participated very much. And committee members, you just now had your practice on your first bill moving through this session. So I want to thank everyone who was available this morning. So we'll go ahead. We've closed the hearing on Assembly Bill 86. We did have a bill to introduce, but it did have to go back for some technical adjustments. So having nothing else on our agenda for this morning, we'll go ahead and go to public comment. Broadcast Services, can you open up the line for public comment, please?
Yes, Chair. The public comment line is open and working. However, we have no callers at this time.
All right. Thank you very much, committee members. Thank you for your time and attention this morning. This meeting is adjourned.